The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
With the 29th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the Washington Commanders select Josh Conerly Jr.
Here we go.
Tackle, Oregon.
Not as sexy as last year, right? Good. Means you had a good year. You're not picking at 2. You're picking at 29, which, by the way, is the lowest the Washington franchise has ever picked. Even when they won Super Bowls, there were only 28 teams. And we'll see. But the big thing is more protection for the gem that you got last year. Now, we'll see if it's either this year, next year, or maybe even the year after that Conerly cements himself at right tackle and maybe is the ultimate replacement for Laramie Tunsil. But, they say he was the best player on the board, as the old cliche goes. And Adam Peters did say that if there was a defensive player, and they're still looking for an edge rusher, there's no question about that. But if there was a defender on the board that they liked and he was at the top of their draft board, they would have taken him. But they've got Josh Conerly Jr., 21 years old. All indications are that he's a mensch. He interviewed well. We'll play some of the interview that he did with the media late last night. He seemed to be a guy with his head on straight, early to tell, but that is something that kind of stuck out for me. This is really how you build your football team. And if you want to look back at the glory days of the Washington franchise, it was the 1980s and the early 1990s where the quarterbacks changed. 3 different quarterbacks won the 3 Super Bowls, 3 different top running backs for the 3 Super Bowls. The constant was the offensive line. It was Jeff Bostic at center. It was Joe Jacoby at tackle, either right tackle or mostly left tackle. Russ Grimm, who's in the Hall of Fame. Some of the other parts changed out. Jim Lachey came along for a few years. He was the best left tackle in football and was part of that line that limited the very much immobile Mark Rippon to only 7 sacks that Super Bowl season. So I got no beef with building around the offensive line. I've seen that happen here. I have seen the glory days of Washington football that was built around the offensive line. So there's no problem with that. And also you have Sam Cosmi, who suffered a serious knee injury in that playoff game against Detroit. And, you hope he's going to be back this year, but there's no guarantees. If he has to sit out an entire season to preserve his health and lengthen his career because he just signed that long-term deal before the start of last year, you do it. So depth on the offensive line, as far as I'm concerned, is something that makes an awful lot of sense. Here was Peters last night opening his news conference explaining why they chose Conerly at number 29.
This was a pick from the entire building. And, you're talking about starting off with Paul Scansey, who's our West Coast scout, stood on the table for him really early and put him on the map. And then really just throughout the process, we fell more and more in love with him. And the coaches were all on board, not just the O-line coaches. They always want somebody that's an O-lineman, but the coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, Brian Johnson, DQ, everybody was just really pumped to get him. And we were holding our breath for a while, thinking he might go ahead of us. So we were thrilled when he was there. It was an easy pick for us to make, and we're really pumped that we had another commander of the building.
I had a chuckle when he talked about Paul Scansey, the West Coast scout, because maybe you've heard this story before, but 1981, there were 12 rounds of the draft, 12 rounds. And Joe Jacoby, monstrous Joe Jacoby, who should be in the Hall of Fame, was not taken. And he had a scout at his house in Louisville who wanted to sign him to the Seattle Seahawks. He was working for the Seahawks. I guess, I don't know if he was based on the West Coast or based in the area that Louisville's in. I don't know. But he was at his house ready to sign him. And Jake said, well, I might be interested in that, but I have an offer to come and visit Washington and meet with them. And so the scout said, okay, if it doesn't work out, come back to me. And he drove Jake to the airport. And, of course, the main reason that Joe wanted to come here was he'd never seen Washington before. He wanted to see the monuments. And the scout who drove him to the airport to come to Washington has remained nameless over all these years. But, boy, did he blow it in letting that one get away. But the old stand on the table, that's what scouts are supposed to do. And Paul Scansey, if, in fact, Conerly becomes a Hall of Famer someday, will get credit for standing on the table. As for the things that they really liked, what they saw on tape, in addition to Scansey standing on the table for him, again, this is Peters.
You look at the tape and you see what an incredible athlete he is for his size, which is backed up by a lot of his testing numbers too, but just really the way he moves, just great feet, great lower body structure, great bend, and it's just super talented for a big man. And then you start hearing about the type of person he is, just human being. And then you hear about the type of football person he is in terms of in the locker room, the leader, the worker, how routine oriented he is, how he's like a true pro already. Despite being really young, he's just 21. I think he's turning 21 in November. So he's still like a baby in terms of age-wise, but he's very, very mature for his age. And so really throughout the process, it just kept getting more and more positive. And then we had him in for a 30 visit last week. He wasn't much of a golfer, but that's all right. He was he just really, really impressed us in person, just the way he handled himself. Really, anybody we talked to, we debrief after those 30 visits, and you go around the room and talk about how each person interacted with him, and it was all superlatives. Probably, we had like 3 really, really special guys here, and he was one of them. And so really, the whole process, it was just kind of all around pretty easy pick.
You know who else wasn't much of a golfer last year? Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels, remember the uproar? Oh, my God, they took all the quarterbacks at once to Top Golf. They knew they were going to take Jaden Daniels, and he was in there with the rest of them. He must be entirely insulted by this. He's not going to want to play for your team, right? So it's another guy not big on golf. And while Daniels, did say he's not much of a golfer, I don't even know if he swung a club at Top Golf that night. But he obviously wasn't too upset about being with the other quarterbacks, and has had a great start to his career here. As for size, nowadays this is probably standard size for a tackle, 6'5", 311 pounds. He allowed only 6 pressures in his last 12 starts, playing left tackle. He would move to right tackle here, and again could possibly play guard. With the situation with Sam Cosmi, if he isn't cleared to play early in the season, or maybe not at all this year. So a lot of things could fall into place with him, and he could wind up playing any one of 3 different positions on the line. I don't know if he's played center, but they're pretty well set at center. So that is the choice. Offensive lineman. For years they didn't do this. They took Chris Samuels in 2000, and that was the year they took LeVar Arrington 2 and Samuels 3. And after that, it was like a decade before they took another offensive lineman, because in the Dan Snyder drafts, it had to be sexy players. And if Dan Snyder was still in charge of this team, might be here now? Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders was the story of the first round of the draft going in, and he's the story of the first round of the draft as it was completed last night, because he was not taken. He did not go to Green Bay to be there when the picks were made. He was at home, and he had set up this elaborate setup in his home with a set of shelves that had the hats of every single team. There was a little space there that said legend on it, and now he is legendary for not being picked. And I guess as opposed to what we saw with Aaron Rodgers 20 years ago, where there was going to be a coin flip between Rodgers and Alex Smith as to who would go number 1. Alex Smith goes number 1 to San Francisco, and Aaron Rodgers slides down the board to number 24 to Green Bay. I guess Shedeur did not have to suffer that indignity, but they had a camera at his house, and here he is having to watch what is going on. While the other players are being taken, and even the Giants moved back up into the first round at 25, making a deal with Houston to get to 25. And they took Jackson Dart. And Shedeur still on the board. When the first round was over, he made a little video announcement, and it wasn't quite what we saw from Dwayne Haskins when he was drafted at number 15 by Washington in 2019, when he expected to be the first quarterback taken and was not, and said the league done messed up. But Shedeur, trying to stay as classy as he could, also said, they made a mistake.
We all didn't expect this, of course, but I feel like with God, anything possible, everything possible. I don't feel like this happened, for no reason. All this is, of course, fuel to the fire. And under no circumstance, we all know this shouldn't have happened. But we understand we're on the bigger and better things. Tomorrow's the day. We're going to be happy regardless. Legendary.
Well, whether it should or it shouldn't remains to be seen. Drew Brees was the first pick of the second round of the draft, and he went on to have a Hall of Fame career. We also had Jimmy Clausen, who was coming out of Notre Dame, and Mel Kiper said at one point he might be the number one pick of the draft, certainly a first-rounder. He didn't go till the second round. Mel said if he's not a success, I'll retire. He was willing to retire, but ESPN wouldn't let him. So, it's going to go one of two ways here. It's going to be really good, it's going to be really bad, or it's going to be kind of in the middle, and you heard the names of Teddy Bridgewater, Andy Dalton before the draft. He might be at that level. They were not. I believe Bridgewater was a first-round pick. Dalton was not. So maybe that's where he is. There's an analysis from CBS as to maybe why he wasn't taken in the first round. One of them is he was not really available much after the season. No participation in the East-West Shrine Bowl, no workout at the Combine, one mandatory press conference in Indianapolis that was at the Combine, and teams were looking for quarterbacks, Titans, Browns, Giants, and Steelers. Well, the Titans took Cam Ward at number 1. The Browns traded out and did not take a quarterback. The Giants traded back in to get Dart, and what you heard was, well, if he slides, he won't slide any further than Pittsburgh at 21. Pittsburgh chose not to take him. Now, maybe they know that Aaron Rodgers is eventually going to sign with him. We don't know. But Jets need a quarterback. Saints need a quarterback. Neither one took him. Also, this is an indication of how far he might fall, because in 9 of the last 10 years, the average draft position for the first 3 quarterbacks is 12. And then last year, after the run on quarterbacks in the first round, we didn't have another one taken until the 5th round of the draft. So that could be, really bad for him if he doesn't go at all tonight in rounds 2 or 3 and becomes a day 3 pick. That's in play here. His size might be a factor. 6'1", 212, not necessarily big. And on top of that, not necessarily fast. Not fast at all, as a matter of fact, even though he's Deion's son. So if you're going to be small, you better be fast, like Drew Brees has been, Kyler Murray, people like that. And he's not. No, his accuracy is very good. His accuracy is outstanding. But his pressure to sack rate was 20% a year ago, down from a concerningly high, they say, 25% in 2023. His average time to throw is exactly 3 seconds. It tied him for the 26th highest out of 156 qualifiers in college football. Well, Peyton Manning wasn't fast either, but he got rid of the ball much faster than 3 seconds. And some would point out, well, Jaden Daniels' pressure to sack rate in his senior year at LSU was 20%. Yes, but we saw this past year that he's able to escape pretty easily. The one thing he's got going for him is accuracy. His adjusted completion percentage of 81.8% ranked 3rd in the FBS in 2024 among quarterbacks with at least 200 attempts. But, however, the average depth of his target was 8.1 yards, ranked 129 of 156. And when you have Travis Hunter, who gets great yardage after catch, maybe you don't have to throw very deep. So, they said in the workouts that he threw a nice deep ball. You will see. But, 32 teams had a shot last night. None of them took him. Field Yates, part of the ESPN draft coverage on last night with Scott Van Pelt. Now, as we look to round 2 and round 3 tonight, the question is how far Shedeur might drop.
Yeah, I thought that there was a real chance we heard Shedeur Sanders' name called at the end of the first round tonight, perhaps in a trade like the Giants executed with the Rams to move up and get Jackson Dart. That did not take place, and as our researcher Evan Kaplan has noted, over the past 3 drafts, there's been a total of one quarterback taken in the second round. So I'd love to sit here and tell you that the floor for Shedeur Sanders now is pick number 40, where the New Orleans Saints next pick. And, of course, the Browns have 2 of the first 4 picks for Friday night. But I can't sit here and say that with absolute certainty right now. It is the most compelling storyline going into night 2. He needs to find a dance partner. But as we have learned throughout this process, each team has a different stack on these quarterbacks. And just because me or Merrill Lewis might perceive Shedeur Sanders to be ranked as the 16th or the 20th or the 3rd best player in the entire draft, there's only a finite number of quarterback buyers right now, and it's clear the league did not have the same level of opinion.
Is there any sort of intel on what would have allowed that slip to happen?
Yeah, I think, as we looked at the draft as a whole, this is how I evaluated the quarterbacks. There were 5 quarterbacks that I believe thought they were going to have a real chance to go in the first 40 picks, Cam Ward being the only slam dunk, as he was the Titans' first overall selection tonight. Beyond that, it was Jackson Dart, Shedeur Sanders, Tyler Shuck, and also Jalen Milroe. Milroe, who was one of 2 players in the green room here tonight who was not taken in the first round. The Saints pick at 40, Scott. But once the Steelers did not pick a quarterback at number 21, we were talking about 4 remaining quarterbacks with really only 3 teams that you felt like were strong bets to take a quarterback at some point early in the draft, them being the Giants, the Browns, and the Saints. I think we're at the point now, Scott, where it feels like one of these remaining 3 quarterbacks, Milroe and Shedeur Sanders and Tyler Shuck, is going to have no seat available for him, at least not early in the process tomorrow night. So somebody's going to have to brace for a potential patient night. We have seen this in prior years. As a matter of fact, last year, Scott, we went over 100 picks. But after Bo Nix was taken 12th overall, before we saw Spencer Rattler in the 5th round, if we have learned one thing about the NFL and quarterbacks, if you're not taking one early, it might be a reflection that the team just not view the player as a potential starter. And if you're drafting a guy that you might think has the ceiling of a backup, it could be a longer wait than we would have guessed coming into the event tonight.
That's Field Yates last night with Scott Van Pelt. Now, Josina Anderson, who is an NFL insider, she used to be with ESPN, she put this out last night. She said, I'm told the Steelers communicated with Aaron Rodgers in the beginning of the week. They would like to receive an answer from him before the draft, at least 48 hours before. Well, maybe they did. We don't know, but maybe they did receive an answer, and maybe the answer is yes, and they're not going to trot this out until after the draft. So that might be an indication of why they didn't take Shedeur. And you might say, well, Shedeur is young. He's a rookie, and Aaron Rodgers was going to play 2 more years max. Yeah, might be, but it might be also that they feel like, well, we don't really want Shedeur Sanders and the attention he would bring as a backup. It's not all his fault, but being Deion's kid, you get an inordinate amount of attention as a number 2 quarterback. Not that he couldn't handle it, not that Deion would be a problem with it, but, that might be part of the equation too. So Steelers seem to be very patient at quarterback, and I guess they have an indication that Aaron Rodgers wants to play, and he wants to play for them, despite his big dramatic appearance on the Pat McAfee show last week where, I got a lot of issues in my life. I got to figure things out. If they want to move on, if I move on. But so I think they probably know that he's going to play. Coming up, Drew Brees. He lasted until the 2nd round, is on his way to the Hall of Fame. He talked about his draft night and an interesting thought on Travis Hunter and the position that he'll play for Jacksonville. Will he play both? Yes, he'll play some of both. But what will his primary position be? Will it be cornerback or wide receiver? He explains why and why he thinks it'll be cornerback. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Coming up in about 20 minutes, I will go over one of the most embarrassing things I have ever seen, not just in draft coverage, but in sports coverage. And it took place last night during the NFL draft, and we'll get to that shortly. And I'm not even talking about Clay Matthews opening up the draft with that ridiculous thing. I just got something from President Trump. He says he looked at all 32 teams and the Bears still suck. Har, har, har. You know, I mean, yeah, it's a lighthearted night. It's fun. It's all that. But, you know, so much schlock and shtick. And boy, wait till you hear what my thoughts on what I saw last night fairly early in the draft. And we'll get to that coming up. Meantime, Drew Brees, who was the first pick of the second round of the 2001 draft, which I guess might give some hope to Shedeur Sanders there. I don't know how early or how late he'll go as the second round gets underway tonight. And he may not even go in the second round or the third round. Might have to wait till Saturday to be picked. Who knows? But Drew Brees, it obviously worked out for him as he was taken by the San Diego Chargers. And as a matter of fact, his career didn't get off to a rollicking start there. That's why they were going to take Eli Manning at the top of the draft in 2004. He didn't want to play for him, so they wound up with Phillip Rivers. And Phillip Rivers actually replaced Drew Brees because in the last game of the season, Brees hurt his shoulder. It was a pretty serious shoulder injury. They didn't know whether he was going to be able to play again, and wound up going to New Orleans, and the rest is history. But in 2001, coming out of Purdue, size was an issue. He's about 6 feet tall, and there was question whether he could play in the NFL. Things have changed, obviously, since then. But there was no, Russell Wilson as a comp or all these other guys who have come along who are not necessarily all that big. But in those days, the draft started on Saturday at noon. And I think they went through the first 3 rounds on Saturday, and then they'd finish it up on Sunday. And so he actually was invited to the draft, but did not show up. But in fact, there was an invite.
I was. It was in New York, so this is 2001. I chose not to go. Just wanted to stay in West Lafayette at Purdue. Had my wife, my brother, our dog, and we just fried up some fish and watched the draft. But it wasn't because look, there was a lot of speculation. I think for me, I hoped I would go in the first round. I think there was about 10 or 12 teams that I thought were strong possibilities, with the Miami Dolphins sitting at pick number 26, where I basically had gotten a guarantee from my head coach, Joe Tiller. He said, hey, one of my best friends is a scout for the Dolphins. If you're there at 26, they're taking you, right? So I kind of had that as like my stop, my stopgap. Like, hey, no matter what happens, hey, I got Jacksonville here, I got Kansas City, I got this, I got that. 26 comes, I just walked over to the phone, Dolphins are going to call. And they didn't call. They drafted Jamar Fletcher, Wisconsin, who picked me off about 3 times in college. So I was like, that's probably a good pick. And then obviously fell to the second round and was drafted by the San Diego Chargers, which was the greatest thing that could have happened to me because I had a chance to go play with Doug Flutie, LaDainian Tomlinson, Lorenzo Neal, Junior Seau, Rodney Harrison, some of the greatest, in my opinion, ever play the game at their positions, and also get coached by Marty Schottenheimer.
But, okay, you probably played with a chip on your shoulder at Purdue, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah.
Played with a chip on your shoulder in the NFL.
That's been a lifetime thing, man.
Do you still have a chip on your shoulder?
No, I mean, look, I'm more about proving the people who believe in you right as opposed to proving the others wrong. At the end of the day, I've always felt like playing the quarterback position at 6 feet tall, look, I don't know what it's like to play it at 6'5", right? So to hear all of that, I mean, look, I heard that coming out of high school. 6 foot, 170 pounds, you're not the prototype guy, we're not going to recruit you. But that's why Doug Flutie was such an inspiration to me and such a mentor for me. He was the starting quarterback when I got to the San Diego Chargers. And he's probably one of the biggest influences on my career.
And he made you feel tall.
Look, Flutie was Mahomes before Mahomes, exactly. I was the tallest guy in the quarterback room in 2001.
Yeah.
It was Doug Flutie at 5'9". He'll tell you 5'10 and a half, he's full of it. It's 5'9", all right? And then Dave Dickinson, who was a CFL legend, came down, played a couple of years in the NFL, and now he's a head coach in the CFL still. So those are the 2 other guys in the room. Double D was 5'10 and a half, and then so I was 6 foot. So we were the 6 foot and under club. We were not real imposing, walking out, winning any pregame competitions, walking around the field. But man, I'll tell you what, Flutie could sling it.
He was ahead of his time. Could you imagine him playing now, where they would have encouraged him to be Doug Flutie at Boston College?
He'd be one of the most celebrated quarterbacks ever.
Yeah.
I mean, he was throwing back shoulders before everybody was throwing back shoulders. The guy would backpedal a 7-step drop from under center. When's the last time you saw that? Well, we don't take snaps under center anymore. What am I talking about? But no, he was well ahead of his time, and in my opinion, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time that will never get the credit he deserves.
But do you think we should go back to under center because it does give more deception and play action, and when you're in the gun, it just seems like we're taking away a little mystery that maybe you could incorporate or reincorporate?
You do. I think if you talk to running backs. The only way, first off, being under center gives you really a two-way threat in the run game, right? Because the back is in what we call the home position. He's right behind the quarterback. So he can go right, he can go left, he can go inside, he can go outside. The minute you go in shotgun, what does the back do? Well, he has to offset one direction. A lot of times defenses set their front, set their defense based on where the back is aligned. Because typically he's going to come across the quarterback in order to take the handoff, and then the QB will have some sort of RPO read. Hey, I'm reading the defensive end. If he crashes, I'm pulling it or I'm dishing it out here. So it tells the defense a lot about where the ball is going to be run. The only way to combat that is to put the back in pistol, which is directly behind you. Well, the back has a hard time seeing when he's directly behind the quarterback, right? So there's some problems there. And your passing game isn't as good, because the back involved in protection has a hard time getting around you to pick up a blitzing linebacker that might be his responsibility. So that's why, being under center, yes, it stresses the defense. Yes, it really helps with play action. Watch the reaction of linebackers when you go under center and all of a sudden you give some sort of a play fake. Man, they have to react to it, and you open up a lot of kind of the deeper intermediate stuff. So, I watch, last year the Pittsburgh Steelers with Russell Wilson. I think that's one of his great strengths. Go under center, and they want to run the ball, play great defense, play action, and then let Russ chuck it. And they were really successful doing that. Sean Payton likes doing that. You watch the evolution of the Broncos offense throughout the year with Bo Nix. I think Bo got more and more comfortable going under center. It helped the run game, it helped the play action, and therefore it helped their team.
Do you want to be a quarterback's coach?
I mean, I am anyway. I coach kids throughout the year. I mentor kids throughout the year.
But like in the NFL?
No.
How come?
Well, it's more so all the other things I could do. Look, because I can still get the same thing accomplished, but without I'm just dedicated to one team. Yeah. I mean, I have the chance to mentor and coach a lot of guys.
Plus, it's a grind to be a coach in the NFL. He made a lot of money playing football. The hours that you put in as a coach during the season, game planning, that's I don't think that's something that he wants to take on. Doesn't make sense. Unless you want to be a head coach. And if you look at it, there aren't that many players that reached his level in the NFL, Hall of Fame player who wants to go on to coach. Look at the head coaches. Are there any now who are Hall of Fame players? I don't think so. And the ones that have been, I think of the Packers with Bart Starr and Forrest Gregg, no, not necessarily great coaches. Doesn't usually work out that way. So, no, I don't think coaching makes a lot of sense. But he made a very good point about Travis Hunter. This was on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday before the draft. So this took place yesterday morning before the draft. But everybody knew that Travis Hunter was going to be one of the first picks. And, in fact, Jacksonville moved up to number 2, made a deal with Cleveland to swap picks to move up to take Travis Hunter. And the question is, what is going to be his primary position? We know he's going to play both defensive back, cornerback, and wide receiver. The question is he going to be 80% at one, 75% at one, and which one is that going to be? And Breeze makes a very good point here. He says, you can get by with a backup wide receiver if somebody gets hurt. Cornerback goes out. That's a really big deal. So he makes this point by telling a story of how he was able to exploit a backup corner to pull off a great comeback, and it's why he believes that the best thing that Jacksonville now, he didn't know he was going to Jacksonville, but that Jacksonville can do now is to play Hunter primarily at corner. Here's the explanation.
We were playing the Chargers 2020 on Monday Night Football, and, man, we had been struggling throughout the game. Ironically, I tore my plantar fascia in my foot in pregame. This is the dumbest thing ever, right? So, all of a sudden, I went from being able to move really well to not being able to move at all. I was just totally relegated to the pocket. So it was Monday Night Football 2020 at our place. We get down 17 points. We're kind of chipping our way back, but it's just one of these, like, we're slugging it out and we're not doing much on offense. And they just had a great defensive plan for us. Well, one of their elite corners went out like early fourth quarter, and they brought in their backup guy, and I'm like, dude, that's all we needed. I'm just going to sit here and throw it at this dude every single time. And sure enough, we did. We ended up going on 2 scoring drives, so we win the game in overtime. But literally, if that doesn't happen, we probably don't win the game. But it's just like there's a lot of these, you know, you're just kind of in real time what's happening in the game, and all of a sudden they lose a guy, or all of a sudden something happens that just changes a scheme or gives you a matchup that you like, and you exploit it.
So that brings up another interesting question. If Travis Hunter becomes primarily a wide receiver for Jacksonville, let's say they're playing a game and that scenario plays out, and they lose a starting corner to injury. Well, Travis Hunter is probably going to be a better backup corner than any other corner you have on the roster. So at that point, do you either switch him over to playing primarily corner for the rest of the game? Do you say, well, he can probably play both ways? He's done it in college for years. Maybe he can do that. You know, there's all kinds of different things that come into play here. Another thing about Jacksonville taking him, this is just my personal feel, they have trouble selling tickets. That's why they're always volunteering to go play in London. That's a drawing card, you know? That's now, Mike Greenberg, Mr. Hyperbole last night, you know, he said he said something along the lines of Shohei Ohtani has revolutionized the game of baseball. No, he hasn't. No, he can pitch. He is primarily a designated hitter. He hasn't revolutionized the game of baseball. Everybody in baseball is not looking for another Shohei Ohtani. That's not what happened. But he's a drawing card. They went and played in Japan. He was big there. So I think Travis Hunter alone can be a drawing card for Jacksonville, and I believe that was part of the reason they moved up to take him. One last story from Breeze, and this was the question of the best quarterback performance that he ever saw, not the best performance that he ever had, but the best one that he ever saw.
I played against Peyton Manning and the Colts in 2004 in the game where Peyton broke Dan Marino's single-season touchdown mark. So he threw touchdown number 49 back when Dan had the record at 48. And we played, first off, we were heavy underdogs in this game. I was with the Chargers. We come play the Colts, and we play so lights out. And we're winning by 7 going into the final drive, and Peyton, this is the game where it gets to 4th down and Peyton sends the punt team off the field the first time that happened.
Is this in overtime?
No, this isn't in overtime yet.
Okay.
But they beat us in overtime, 34-31. But I think we're winning 31-24. 2 minutes and something left. It's one of those questionable, like, do we punt it? But they're deep in their territory. You know, Dungy sends the punt team out. He sends them back, you know. and then rips a back shoulder to Reggie Wayne on our sideline. It was one of those, like, I saw it coming. You know, and yet there's nothing you can do about it. Mainly because I'm a quarterback and I'm on the sideline. I'm not playing TV. But I knew it was coming. I was like, that's where I would have gone. Rips a back shoulder to Reggie Wayne. Boom, boom, methodical down the field. And then Brandon Stokely is in the slot over here. And we're in cover 2, so 2 high safeties. And he looks over here, and he gives this signal to this left side. And this is like the universal signal for smash. And a smash combination is hitch with a corner. But he was doing it so emphatically that I'm like, something's up here. He wants the safety to see smash, smash. So the safety overplays the corner, and Stokely runs up and gives it a nod, crosses the safety's face. Peyton hits him right in the chest. Touchdown, ties the game. Touchdown number 49. And then they get the ball in overtime, go right down the field, kick a field goal, and beat us. So just the whole send them off the field. I got this, coach. Back shoulder to Reggie Wayne. Smash, smash, psych, right? And then gets us to OT and beats us. I was like, Peyton Manning.
Which shows you what a thinking man's position that is. And Peyton Manning was among the best, if not the best, to ever do it. And the explanation there you get from Breeze is he's thinking 2 steps ahead, trying to fool the safety into a type of coverage that he wants to set up Brandon Stokely for the winning touchdown pass. That is playing the position with basically no wheels whatsoever. Peyton Manning was a statue back there. But he got rid of the ball quickly. He was out-thinking the defense. When he came to the line of scrimmage, he had studied so much of the defense. He knew exactly where the ball was going to go, exactly how it was going to play out, and he duped them into believing he was going to do one thing and then another. That's a great explanation of playing quarterback, and that's what separates the very good from the great. And that is why, Peyton Manning is in the Hall of Fame and is one of the all-time great quarterbacks. Okay, Commanders have made their pick. They've gone offensive line. It is Josh Conerly Jr. from Oregon. Reaction from GM Adam Peters and Conerly himself as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. So how will we look at this in a couple of years? Brilliant pick by Adam Peters. Josh Conerly Jr. has established himself at right tackle, and you can keep him there for the next 12 years, keeping Jaden Daniels upright on the way to a Hall of Fame career. Or, we took a shot there, looked good. All signs pointed to him being a star, and just didn't work out. We'll see. But off last year, you got to say, in Adam Peters we trust, right? I mean, there's really no reason to doubt him with what he did last year in the draft. Not just Jaden Daniels, Mikey Sanderstill. He got him the second of 2 second-round picks. And I think that the benefit of the doubt has to go to young Adam Peters, who's on his way to having a long, long run here in Washington. And I think when you look at a player like this, it's a relatively safe pick. I think. I think they reached a couple of years ago. They didn't have enough turnovers, so they took a cornerback who was like 120 pounds soaking wet, who had a bunch of pick sixes in college, and he's probably not going to be in the league for very long. So you take a guy who's 310 pounds and has performed very well at a high level at a school like Oregon, where they're playing top teams in the Big Ten and other places and in the playoff and all that stuff. So that's somebody that I think that they can be pretty secure. Will eventually round into being a starter here. And with Sam Cosmi very questionable to start the season on time after that devastating knee injury that he suffered against Detroit in the playoffs. You got to have plenty of depth on the offensive line. So they went there. But at 29, Peters says that there were plenty of chances for him to trade out of that pick, which might have been tempting since they went into the draft with only 5 picks and at the moment have only 4 left. Might they have been willing to trade down in the second round for that pick?
We got a ton of calls, when we're on the clock. We got calls throughout the week, just preliminary calls like we talked about earlier in the week in our presser. And then we got a ton of calls leading up to that. And what we had discussed beforehand is really if he was on the board, we weren't going to trade back. And so there's an opportunity to trade back with a few other teams. It wasn't very far, but in our minds it was not worth even risking missing on him.
Yeah, and the feeling was that, there were a lot of defensive players. So even at 61 tonight, they think they can get somebody who can be a contributor. They're still looking, obviously, for the edge rusher, probably a little more depth in the secondary. But this was a guy that, he got a big recommendation. There's a saying in the NFL, he stood on the table for him. I talked about this, with John Beck the other day. John Beck, one of the most disastrous quarterbacks in Washington history. It was just terrible. But Kyle Shanahan, when he was an assistant coach in Houston, literally said he stood on the table for them to draft him. And he was in Houston, he was in Miami, he was in Baltimore. They never really felt like he got a fair chance. He got a fair chance here, and he plotzed. I don't think that's going to happen here at all, but it is, of course, a possibility. But there's a West Coast scout. His name is Paul Scanty. And Adam Peters is a former scout himself. It kind of reminds me of Mike Rizzo. Mike Rizzo, he does use analytics with the Nationals, but he's a former scout, and he relies greatly on his scouts for evaluation. And Peters does the same thing. And when he got the pitch from Paul Scanty, he was willing to listen.
He really stood on the table for him. We do like early in the season, we'll talk to all the scouts and who are their guys. And he said, this is my guy. This is like, it was really early in the process too. Before I'd even seen him, I saw him in person at a game when they played Michigan. And I remember him saying that, so I was really, really interested in seeing him and seeing the way he moved in person. It was super impressive, but it wasn't so much, obviously he loved the player, but he just loved everything about him, just what he was about. I think, they're both from Seattle, so he probably had a little bias there too, but that's all right. But that also means he knows a lot about him. And so when you have a scout who's been in that area for a long time, which Paul has, he knows a lot about those players, especially the ones that are close to him geographically. So you always put more stock into that. And, just being a road scout that I was for a long time, you really start to, when you look around and see the other scouts, and they really know the guys, like where they live. And they just, that's just your job, right, is to know that. So you put a little more stock into that. So that really, gave us a lot of confidence early on.
Okay. So he got the big pitch from somebody he trusted. This is on a question that came from Ben Standing, and I think you saw this early in the draft. Kind of surprising the number of offensive linemen that went early, like the Patriots at number 4. They took Will Campbell. Like the Jets at number 7, they took an offensive tackle. Armand Membu went to them at 7. The Saints at number 9. A lot of people thought they might take Shedeur Sanders there. They did not. They took Kelvin Banks Jr., offensive tackle. So, when you get to the bottom of the first round and you're looking at all those offensive linemen, tackles that have gone, there's feeling like, okay, we're going to run out of offensive linemen before we run out of defensive linemen and defensive edge rushers. So this was the question to Peters about that.
The general sense of this draft was offensive tackles kind of dry up quick, and then the defensive ends and some other positions run a little bit deeper. Did that factor into the thought process of, hey, we want to jump here, we can maybe find these other positions later?
Yeah, you always look at that. I think that's a good question. And yeah, we did think that after Josh, there was going to be a little bit of a dip in terms of the guys that we really liked, and it wasn't a huge dip, but you're right. You do look across the board and say, okay, okay, we can get these guys later. That shouldn't be the driver of your decision, but it also makes for you to feel more comfortable about doing that.
Yeah, and not that guys from smaller schools don't make it in the NFL, and we've even seen like Division III players make it. That doesn't always indicate whether or not the guy's going to be a good NFL player. But you like to see, just like they talk about in practice, good versus good. You like to see those kind of things. So this is Peters on the matchups that Conerly had with some of the top players and how he fared there.
One, the way he competed against Abdul Carter. He went toe-to-toe with Abdul Carter, who's the best pass rusher in the draft. He did really well. And he did really well against a lot of really good players. He played at Ohio State twice, and they were getting the break speed off in the second game, and he was still competing to the very last second, and that showed a lot. And just so those types of things you see in him. When we have metrics where our R&D department does a great job of giving us metrics, how do they perform against high draftable players? And so he performed really high against high draftable players, and that lined up with what our eyes saw. And so those things make you really, not just his skill, but the fact that he will go toe-to-toe with those guys. He's not going to freak out. He's not going to panic. He's not going to do things that he doesn't normally do when he's face-to-face with a really great player.
Yeah, I mean, it's a metric, but this is a basketball comparison, and it goes back 100 years. But many years ago, the Portland Trail Blazers took LaRue Martin, number one. This is when big men were really valuable in the NBA. And the reason that they took him is that he played a really good game against Bill Walton, who was the best player in the country. I think this is 1972. And LaRue Martin is one of the all-time busts, and that's how they judge it on. So they didn't judge it all on that, But I don't know if you could tell 100%, and they don't, And again, I trust in Adam Peters, but sometimes when you see a matchup in college, maybe it's not the same thing. But that's another metric that they used. Here's Conerly, Josh Conerly, when he did meet with the media by Zoom, and when his name was called at 29. He was not surprised because he had been in for one of the 30 visits. He had spent a lot of time talking to team officials. With all the draft speculation, it's not a name that you heard very often. Like it was, oh yeah, they're looking at edge rushers. They're not going to get Abdul Carter, but they're going to get somebody like that. And they wind up with an offensive lineman. And maybe there was some surprise when his name was announced, but it wasn't surprise for him.
Honestly, was I expecting it? Yeah, because I was ready to go. But yeah, no, it's God-given opportunity, man.
What's it mean to get to block for Jaden Daniels?
I mean, the world to me, that Heisman Trophy winner, somebody I looked up to, just someone that went from Pac-12, went to SEC, did big things, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity just to get out there and block for one of the best.
Hey, Josh, they traded for Laramie Tunsil, who plays left tackle. That's who you played. What did they tell you their plans were for you?
I haven't heard anything, but whatever's asked, that's what I'm doing.
You said you would do whatever. Would you be comfortable playing on the right side as well?
Hey, that's what I gotta do.
What were your impressions on the Commanders, obviously, before getting drafted?
Oh, it's a great place to be. That's what I did know, and the energy was high, and things were moving in the right direction.
What was it like when you got the call? Who called? What'd they say?
So everything. I mean, I've gotten like 10 calls in the last 5 minutes. But the GM called me, and I was hyped from that moment. Got to talk to Coach Dan Quinn, talk to owner. But it was high emotions in my draft room and in theirs. So yeah.
Congratulations, man.
Josh, what do you think you add to this team?
I mean, unbelievable person, great teammate for anything, an amazing player on the field, someone that's going to make sure their quarterback stays upright and opens up lanes for anybody else. So, yeah.
What stood out to you about the 30 visit?
Really the energy in the building. Everybody was really live and well, you know what I mean? Like energy was high in the building, you know what I mean? Like you can just tell that there's good things building.
Yeah, I mean, what a change because years ago, not that many years ago, 3 years ago, when there was still Snyder ownership, there was a feel in there that was really bad. I mean, I've been in that building a bunch of times, and you heard the stories that when Snyder would occasionally walk through the halls, the employees were told not to make eye contact and things like that. You don't see Josh Harris there very much, but the people that he has in place, they create this atmosphere led by Dan Quinn of very upbeat and positive, and I'm sure they had a nice greeting for him. And when they signed Josh Johnson, Josh Johnson is the nomad quarterback. He's been with like 14 teams, several of them a bunch of times. He's been here a couple of times. They had this big elaborate greeting for him. So, the way that they have changed, it's a well-worn cliche, but the way that they have changed the culture has really been remarkable. And here's a guy, I'm sure he had some other visits. I'm sure he looked at other teams, and he talked about the energy that he felt here. So, everything you hear there, it's all good. It's all positive. Who knows where it goes? But you got to think that with the combination of how Peters is able to evaluate talent and everything you hear there about a guy who's, very positive and upbeat, that it's got a pretty good chance to work out. But it may not. That's the way the NFL draft goes. A lot of busts along the way. A couple of other notes we've not spent a lot of time on in the first hour. We talked a lot about Shedeur Sanders, who was slid out of the first round. You heard, if he slides, he's not sliding any further than Pittsburgh at 21. Pittsburgh didn't take him. So whether he'll go in the second round, we'll have to see. But Will Levis is the only quarterback in the last 3 years who's gone in the second round. So it seems like if you don't go in the first round, then you really tumble. And the difference between the run-on quarterbacks in the first round last year to where we got to with the next quarterback taken, it was in the 5th round. I don't know if Shedeur will slide that far, but this is totally different than I'm sure he expected. He didn't go to the draft, but he had this elaborate setup in his house with these shelves that had the hats of every single team, and he referred to himself as legend. And, he said, he put out a statement, this is wrong. But we'll see. We'll see if it's he was not bitter about it, upbeat, but, it's up to him to prove it, to see how wrong everybody was. The Giants, they had brought him. They spent a lot of time working with him. You heard last-minute visits and so forth. Well, they traded up to take a quarterback, but it was Jackson Dart. And they made a deal with the Texans. They traded the number 34 pick, which, was their pick early in the 2nd round, the number 99 pick, and a third rounder in 2026 to the Texans to move up 9 spots. So that's quite a haul to move up 9 spots for a quarterback who was not projected necessarily to go in the 1st round, Jackson Dart, but he goes ahead there. And they opt for Dart, who did throw for 4,200 yards and 29 touchdowns last year. Ole Miss was 10-3. I watched one of his games. He's a competitor. He made a lot of mistakes at the end of the game, but it didn't rattle him. He kept coming back and kept coming back. So we'll see how that works out. It's interesting that the Commanders took a player by the name of Conerly, and there was a player from Ole Miss that the Giants had years ago named Charlie Conerly, who I think he was the quarterback when they won their championship in 1956, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was Charlie Conerly at quarterback. And then, of course, the last Ole Miss quarterback that they had was named Eli Manning, and they won a couple of Super Bowls with him. So if you're going to the Ole Miss well and you're picking up a guy named Dart, maybe down the line he's the 3rd Ole Miss quarterback to win a championship for the New York Giants. And then the Atlanta Falcons did something which seems, really like a reach. But Bobby Beathard used to do this when he was running the Redskins draft. He would trade a number 1 for next year, either to get back in the 1st round or get into the 2nd round. Remember, he had an infatuation with white cornerbacks, and he took a guy named Torrey Nixon in 1984. Torrey Nixon was from, I think, a small school in California, and Beathard wanted him so badly that he traded the next year's number 1 to get back into the 2nd round to take him. He wound up trading him before the season even started, and he played for the Raiders for a few years and was out of the league. What the Falcons did last night is they moved into 26 by giving the Rams quite a haul. Their 2nd rounder this year, a 7th rounder this year, and their 2026 1st rounder. So you're giving up a 2nd rounder and a 1st rounder to move up back into the 1st round to take James Pierce Jr., defensive end from Tennessee. He was a guy who was really hyped at the beginning of the season. There was a projection he might go number 1 this year. But he had a relatively disappointing year, 7.5 sacks, 13 tackles for a loss. Those are down from his 23 numbers. So they're betting on him having an off year and being very good. But the Atlanta Falcons look like they're going for it. The only thing I think about them, and maybe this had to do with the Cousins deal from last year, is they got an owner, Arthur Blank, who's in his 80s. And Arthur Blank, of course, came close against the New England Patriots in 2018, or was it? No, it was 2017, when they had that 28-3 lead. And so, maybe he's looking at this like, I don't have that many years left. I'd like to win a Super Bowl before I do. Of course, Leon Hess famously, hired Rich Kotite. I guess this was sometime in the 90s. Rich Kotite proved to be a terrible head coach. He went like 1-15 one year with the Jets. But Leon Hess, who was the owner of the Jets, said, "Why are you hiring him?" He says, "I'm 80 years old. I want to win." Well, that didn't work out. And we'll see if this works out for Arthur Blank. Anyway, that's enough on that. Capitals getting ready to play Game 3. If you're just jumping in your car, Craig Laughlin has tweeted out that his he hasn't been feeling well lately, and his cardiologist advised him to take a few games off. So he will not be doing the game tonight on Monumental. I imagine it'll be Alan May with Joe Bettinati. But hopefully he will be back as the Monumental is allowed to do the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. And in order to get there, they got to win 2 more games in this series. They could get to number 3 tonight, and we'll hear what Spencer Carberry says about playing that game as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So among the things we'll be discussing on Monday morning is what the Commanders did in the rest of the draft after they made Josh Conerly their first-round pick last night. They've got 4 picks left, only 1 tonight so far. They could possibly trade out of the second round. They're at 61 and maybe add more picks, although staying in the second round be tough at that point. Now you're looking at the third round, more picks, and then they don't have a fifth rounder as well. So there'll be only 2 picks at the moment, the way things are set up tomorrow. But they do have 4 more picks to go, and we'll see what they do with them, whether they trade out of it or use the pick as they did last night. And we also have, of course, the hockey playoffs. Capitals are 2 wins away, which they have been before. 10 times in their history, they have blown a 2-0 series lead, 3 times in the Alex Ovechkin era. So it's far from over. These games have been very, very close. The margin is razor thin. As Spencer Carberry, the coach, said earlier this week, they could easily be down 0-2 as up 2-0. And now he's going into Montreal. Now, anecdotally, it would seem that home ice advantage would be huge in the playoffs. The numbers don't bear that out. It's amazing that it isn't more of an advantage than it is, because it's wild. If you've been to a hockey playoff game, man, the atmosphere is crazy. And Carberry, having been an assistant in Toronto and having this rivalry with Montreal, knows what it's like to play there. Not in a playoff game, but he's been inside that building before, and he knows what to expect tonight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I know people say it's like no other experience in the league of playoff hockey in Montreal at the Bell Center. I'm a little bit biased because I thought our building was pretty impressive over the last 2 games, but I understand the history and the legacy of the Canadiens organization and all the championship years that they've had and playoff hockey coming back as well, because it's been a few years, right? So you can just imagine what that building's going to be like. And even playing in the regular season there, it's special. It's a whenever you play at the Bell Center as a visiting team, as a coach, standing there and the oohs and ahs of the crowd when certain things happen, it's going to be a great experience. It's going to be a hard place to play. We know that, and we're going to have to be prepared for that, and we're probably going to need to be a little bit better than we were in the last 2 games.
Okay, and so that's the outlook from somebody who's been there, been to that arena. As far as the pressure goes, and I guess the pressure would ratchet up given their history, given the fact that each game becomes more important. And if they lose tonight, it's a 2-1 series with Game 4 in Montreal. It's entirely possible they come home with the momentum on the side of the Canadiens and having to regain that. This is Carberry addressing the pressure that they're going to be under tonight.
I'm going to tell you right now, the temperature is going to be very high at the Bell Center in their building. Can't hear yourself think. So it's one thing is executing through the pressure, and the second thing is not letting it snowball. And I've talked a lot about this through the series and through the playoffs, is momentum, and how do you, when you get it, how do you hold on to it? And when you lose it, how do you stop it as quickly as you can? And that's just what we didn't do. We let it snowball to where it's now 1 shift, 2 shifts, 3 shifts. Now it's 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, and now you're back on your heels for a significant portion of the period.
Yeah, they have had issues with pressure in the third period. So yeah, you'd like to go into the third period with a 3-goal lead, but the reality is these games are all close, and it's been excellent play by Logan Thompson in goal, which has put them in this position as he's made save after save after save. But you can't live like that forever. Last thing from Spencer Carberry from his news conference yesterday, and this is a word we throw around all the time, and we used it all the time with the run that the Commanders had last year: culture. The culture that's been created here. This is Carberry on that.
They're a really tight-knit group that's we have a ton of personality, which I love. I think, it's one thing to be really close as a team and have a love and care, and it's another thing to have a lot of life, laughter, energy, different personalities, and I feel like we have a lot of that, which I think is a huge positive, because it brings a group that has that foundation of caring about one another, wanting to do the right thing, want to be there for their teammate, win, and do the necessary things for each other to accomplish that. But then you've got also these guys that don't always see eye to eye on certain things, or don't have the same outlook on certain situations in life and they all fit together, and they all are welcoming to one another from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different personalities. You've got quieter guys like Matt Roy, and you've got loud, flamboyant Brandon Duhaime, and that's, I think, what makes our group special from a cultural standpoint, and why we have so much fun at the rink, even in a competitive environment where we're trying to work and get better and win hockey games.
Yeah, and the thing about this year particularly, I thought the Alex Ovechkin chase would completely swallow up the team. And when I looked at it a couple of years ago, I thought, they're going to have to drag this guy along while they try to rebuild the team. Well, they finished with the best record in the East. Ovechkin is certainly a focal point. He was the biggest offensive star for sure in Game 1, where he had 2 goals, including the game winner in overtime, first overtime playoff winning goal of his career. Also assisted on the other goal, and he's fit in with a lot of new players. There are only 4 guys left from the Stanley Cup championship team of 2018. Ovechkin being one of them, but that has fit together very nicely. And we'll see where it goes. Things can change, and if they lose tonight, the pressure is going to be huge going into Sunday night's game. And then they'll get a couple of days off. It's every other day, but then they'll be off if they lose one of the next 2 or both. They would be off for a couple of days before they would resume on Wednesday, the Wednesday night at home against Montreal. Let's finish with this and a couple things real quick. First, I did want to mention the Sharp situation with Shannon Sharp, and I don't know where this is going to go. But there's a woman who has filed a civil suit in Nevada accusing him of sexual assault. She's looking for $50 million. There have been reports that he's going to sign a $100 million deal. I don't know whether he's already signed it or not to do a podcast, but she's accusing him of sexual assault, looking for $50 million. They met at a gym in 2023. He's not married, but this is serious stuff. This 2023, she was 19, according to the suit. It alleges that they began a consensual relationship, although in the next couple of years, Sharp, she says, was physically abusive, raped her twice. There's also some audio that has been put out where he talks about choking her, which is not good. Now, this is something that, I'm not an attorney. I don't know how this goes. I do know Lanny Davis a little bit. He was in the Clinton administration, and he has already said that Sharp offered the woman $10 million before the suit was filed. That's probably not a good thing here. I don't know, but, offering to – sometimes there are settlements like that where they just want to keep it out of the news, so I'm sure that's what they're going to say. But Sharp is now taking time off from ESPN. He says, at this juncture, I am electing to step aside temporarily. I will be devoting my time to my family and responding and dealing with these false and disruptive allegations set against me. Said he expects to return at the start of the NFL preseason. But in a statement, ESPN said this is a serious situation, and we agree with Shannon's decision to step away. So whether he returns or not to ESPN remains to be seen. But that is something that obviously is very, very serious. So anyway, that's a wrap for round one of the draft. We'll have a follow-up on the entire draft when we get back together on Monday. Also, where the Capitals are after they play the next two games. Either they're moving on to round two or they're coming home to play Game 5 next Wednesday night. Bram is coming up next, and I will see you back here on Monday morning at 9 a.m.